it's a much easier thing to do if you just say, well, here, let me help.
You're changing the environment a little bit, right?
Yeah. So it becomes more of a working with as opposed to working for, offering an opportunity to collaborate as opposed to trying to dictate.
Instead of just sitting and blaming, right, everybody else, go and saying, I need help. Nobody will go and saying, oh, you're like, oh, forget it. I'm not helping you, right? Anybody wants to help.
What I like to do, start off with the why. So as opposed to saying, this is the what, and certainly not the how, but with the why, this is what we're trying to do. And it really revolves around storytelling.
Welcome to Leadership in Manufacturing podcast, where we explore essential leadership topics in the electronics component industry. I'm your host, Sanna Winding. I'm a strategic leader with over 20 years of experience in the B2B marketing, product development, and team empowerment. I'm passionate about sharing insights. Hope you can see it. And tools to help professionals enhance their leadership skills. We just want to become better leaders, and we should have this drive. What has storytelling to do to become a much better leader? You want to listen to this new episode? I just interviewed Paul Pickard. He's the Chief Technology Officer at Insight Lighting. We talk about storytelling and how that invites for collaboration and input and gives a much more dynamic environment for innovation. We also touch on topics like what makes a good leader, how diversity brings positivity into projects and within the team. So a lot of advice to help you become a much better leader in the industry. So enjoy this episode. Let's get started for today's episode, and I want to introduce today's guest. So Paul Pickard is a seasonal innovative leader and mechanical engineer with over 24 years of experience in the lighting industry. He has played a key role in developing groundbreaking products like the first mass-market LED downlight, and he's also recognized for his ability to tackle complex business challenges. Paul excels at fostering collaboration among teams, and that's why he's on here. And as a mentor and an author, he prioritizes trust and empathy as essential drivers of organizational success. Currently, he serves as the Chief Technology Officer at Insight Lighting, where he passionately shares insight on innovation, technology, and the impact on light on human interaction. So welcome, Paul. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So it's fun because we like reconnecting a little bit here because we actually both worked at Lithonia Lighting. I know it's now Acuity Brands, but I don't think we ever met back then. But it's just fun.
I don't think so.
Yeah. And I really love because I am an LED or lighting geek as well. That's where I started my career. So I'm excited to hear, more about you. So my first question, I'm really happy here, is actually to say, what excites you about the lighting industry and the LED technology?
So the lighting industry in general, I think excites me because of the ability to transform the spaces that we spend most of our time occupying. Yeah. I've written before that about the importance of relationships and building trust and empathy at work, and largely that's kind of for our own personal well-being, because we spend, if you commute and you're in an office, you spend more time with your colleagues and in your office than you actually do at home with your family. It's just kind of the way the day works out. And lighting offers an opportunity to help transform those spaces and turn them into spaces that are productive and inviting and warm and welcoming and striking, and basically all those things that can be done with light and lighting design. So I started with Lithonia Lighting and Acuity Brands, and it just stuck. I never looked back.
Yeah.
And LEDs. The capability there to do two things. One is to control light more effectively. So, the ability to design optics around something that has a very limited source profile. So you can kind of squeeze the light into different shapes and do different things with it than you could with a fluorescent tube or with an incandescent light bulb. Yeah. That's been a whole lot of fun. And I've just dove back into it. So I now have a simulation tool on my desk, and I can go and play with optical designs again. And it's been a lot of fun. And the other thing, which I don't do as much of here as I did in my last role, is just the ability to manipulate spectra, and the capabilities that you can bring to the fore for affecting the health and well-being of people within spaces like in office spaces, but also the capability to fine-tune light sources to be less invasive in the overall environment. So the focus on dark skies now, and the ability to understand like what is our impact on the environment and what is our impact on other species, flora and fauna, and even the ability to appreciate the night sky. Well, those things are all things that we've started to address with rules and regulations around full cutoff and where the light's going to go, but also can be significantly impacted by the manipulation of spectra specifically for that purpose, basically to enable human visual acuity while still having minimal impact on the world around us. And so those feel like big, kind of weighty problems to tackle, and that feels like something that's worthy of our time and effort.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. I think because you and I, we're like light geeks here. So when you walk into a room, I'm sure you're observing, how the light, right? Even if I'm at the dentist office and I sit there looking up,
sure.
I'm like, oh my God, could they get the same color on the tubes, right? That's me. But it's impacting how you feel, right? So if you walk into a room and you already feel that this is a nice room, that means the lighting or the ambient lighting, right? There's a lot of lighting there, is actually perfect. But if you walk in and something's off, like me in a dentist chair, right, then it's not right. But I think it's not everybody observing it and know what maybe can pinpoint and saying, oh, it's because the light is not right. I think it's just because we've been in this business a long time.
For sure. Well, and so I'm sure, like you, I have friends that call up and they're like, I moved into this house and my kitchen, and I just can't, like, we don't even turn on the lights in the kitchen because I can't stand them, but I don't know what to do. And it's like, and I had somebody send me a video, like, well, here's what it looks like. I'm like, well, your recessed cans aren't deep enough, and so you're getting a lot of glare, and your CCT is probably a little bit too cool for something that you'd want to do on the. I mean, it's just amazing how when you look at things, you go like, oh. Of course, right? This is gonna impact the way you feel in a space just by very small changes in design for color, temperature, or for shielding or distribution and
dimming
like that.
As well, right? I think the whole
sure.
that you're getting into your household and what options you have. I know we're going a little bit off topic here, but I have a passion for lighting as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's get back on track, because I wanna talk about or ask you about the company culture. How do you foster and how do you support the whole collaboration when you have a team? What's your secret?
I don't know that it's necessarily a secret. It's there's things that I do in all my organizations, or at least that I've learned to do in all my organizations. I like to tell people that if I'm good at anything, it's because I've failed miserably multiple times and learned the hard way all the way through. Yeah. But by the time you've done it for a while, then you can come back and go, oh, that didn't work, and this does.
Yeah.
One is just offering an opportunity to collaborate as opposed to trying to dictate. So, in corporate cultures, we have this focus, and I understand the focus on efficiency and trying to manage time and manage tasks, but KPIs and operational parameters that basically make people feel like they're part of a machine. It's not conducive terribly to creativity, because people look at that and they go, well, I have this limited slot of time to be able to do something, and now I'm being told, here's what you need to go and do. And so you drive to the easiest solution that's going to be executed within that time, and you do it, and things stay fairly stagnant. So what I like to do is start off with the why. So as opposed to saying this is the what and certainly not the how, but with the why, this is what we're trying to do, and it really revolves around storytelling. So you're wanting to tell a story at the end of the process to the market. Here's the story that we're going to be able to tell to the market. That translates back to the story that you communicate internally. Because if this is the story I want to tell at the end, then I have to be able to have the conversation with the team internally to say, this is what we're trying to achieve, and this is why we're trying to achieve it. Because if we can do X, then everybody is going to look at that and go, wow, that's new, that's different. Yeah. That solves a problem that hasn't been solved before. Yeah. So that's starting with the why is one, and kind of backing in from a storytelling perspective. The other is just is collaboration and generating a multitude of ideas. So Jeremy Utley is an adjunct professor at Stanford and wrote the book, or was a co-author of the book, Idea Flow. He talks about the creativity of everybody, and basically that it's not about having, brilliant people that come to an aha moment, like immediately they just hone in on that.
Yeah.
He talks about some of the greatest innovators that have lived, and how they just generated thousands and thousands of different ideas, and most of them weren't good. And they didn't see that as failure. They saw that as part of the process. And so just the volume of ideas that get generated, basically the more you can foster an environment where you don't shut things down, but you basically open things up. All right, let's be wide to start off with. Let's have as many ideas as possible. The more likely you are to generate something that's really going to be transformative, that's really going to be innovative, that you can land on.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to focus on, like, we have to have something that's very cutting edge or very innovative, and trying to hone in on that one thing right away.
Yeah.
Come up with 50 things, 100 things, 200 things, and then start to come back and sift after you've kind of got that machine running of, we're just going to put things out there and say, wouldn't it be great if? Wouldn't it be great if? And what about doing it this way?
Yeah.
And starting to generate that churn basically is just part of the process for generating innovation and creativity.
I like the approach of the why and the storytelling. I think I need to bring in that storytelling and how I work. I want to use that. It's like giving me really, really great thoughts on it. But again, not a but and when you have a project, right? There's always a timeline. And how do you then, because there's features, there's functions, right? And you have your storytelling, and you started with the why. How do you make sure, because sometimes you need to let go, right? Of a feature, of a function. How do you make sure that you stay on focus or on target, so you still have the storytelling of that product?
For sure. Well, so one of the things that you have to do in the middle of the process is basically prioritize. So if you have the story that you're going to tell, and then you come back and say, and here's how we're going to deliver that. Yeah. And then this is the what, this is the actual thing that we're going to create to do that. Then you end up having to basically bounce that feature set or those sets of priorities off of that that creative brief, essentially, that thing that says this is what's going to go out into the world. Yeah. And say, do we compromise the story by having this? And as you know, when you've been involved in this business long enough, there's always trade-offs. You can typically make it more expensive, or you can spend more money, or you can take more time. And all of those things are kind of, I used to, when I was back at Lithonia, actually, when I started talking about it this way, it's like whack-a-mole. Like, you push one thing down, another thing pops up. Like, you can't just say, well, make it fast and cheap and good and go. Oh, go. Like, you're always gonna trade off one of these elements. Yeah. And so the ability to basically be very, very cognizant up front in terms of what are the key elements that define the thing that you're creating in order to achieve that outcome, that storytelling outcome. Yeah. And then prioritizing them, like this even over that. Like, so if you're in a budget conscious environment, maybe it's price even over functionality, or it's price even over lead time, or whatever the case might be. Yeah. And of course, the tendency is to say, well, no, I have to have it all. I have to have short lead times, and I have to have low price. But if you force the prioritization, say, well, if you had to give up one thing, what would it be? And that really starts to, and that allows you, when push comes to shove, it's like, okay, well, we could take an extra 3 months and we could probably achieve this, or we can get it done in the original timeline, and we're going to have to make some compromises. Yeah. Here's the compromises we could make. If you have that framework, as opposed to kind of coming at it freestyle, like, well, now, like, it turns into a big conversation, a big argument that happens between the various stakeholders. If you have this kind of list up front, you go, okay, well, these are obviously the things that we said were negotiable.
Yeah.
if we got into this spot.
Yeah.
So that's one, and then the other is especially in larger organizations, although it happens in small organizations too. I think development teams, once a schedule is set, they're always optimistic until the very last minute. Like, I think we can get it done. Yeah, it's really really hard, and we've got a lot of work to get done within this. But right up until the very end, I think I'm going to get it done. And then you get to the end, and it's not done. Like, here's the date, and we didn't hit it.
Make it. Yeah.
The fostering a culture where people feel the freedom to say, well, first you have to do a work breakdown. You have to basically come back and say, what are all the elements? Like, what amount of time are we going to allocate for each of these things that lead to the end result?
Yeah.
And then fostering an environment where people can say, I thought I was going to take 2 weeks to get this done. I'm 2 weeks in, and I've got 2 more weeks to go at least, because I came up with X or Y or Z problem. And having them kind of highlight that at the beginning, that allows for kind of strategic shifts, because you could say, well, what if we brought in more people? Like, what if we brought in a contractor to help? Or what if we early on in the process, what if we compromised on the level of functionality that we wanted to include in this release? Does that collapse the timeline? Or now you can look at the rest of the timeline, which might still be another 50 weeks if it's a year-long project, and you go, okay, is there someplace else where we think we can make that up? And you can plan in advance, as opposed to kind of just letting things tumble downhill and getting to a point where you're now out of time and you don't really have a whole lot of levers left to pull in order to try and make things happen within the timeline.
Yeah. Timeline. It's not an easy one. I know from my experience, if you then tell sales, right, to say, oh yeah, it'll be ready here. And then they're like, oh, does that mean? And you're like, no, we need to adjust the tool, because something that comes out of a tool the first time needs adjustments. And they're like, no, it'll be done. I'm like, no, it's not. We need a buffer.
I mean, and that's a planning exercise, which the way I've heard it described before is, decide up front how tolerant you're going to be of schedule slip. And if you plan something that is 90% likelihood, then you're probably going to have a longer timeline, but you're probably going to be more predictable. If you plan a 50-50 timeline, I think there's just as much opportunity to miss this schedule as there is to hit it, then you have to be tolerant of the fact there's going to be a tolerance window when that thing comes out. If you do a top down, like, this has to be done in 6 months, and the design team is telling you it's going to be done in a year, that's a not a 1090 or a 595 sort of schedule. Like, there's might be some miracle where you could hit that timeline, but it's really going to be challenging to get there. Then you have to kind of plan on the fact that, well, we'll try, but the likelihood is that you're not going to be able to get there. And for me, going anything beyond a 50-50 timeline, it's disheartening to the team, because they look at it and go like, well, it feels like I'm more likely to fail than not. And so how hard am I really going to work in order to be able to try and hit this timeline? I personally don't think is achievable. So that's something that leadership can manage on the front end, is listen to the teams, understand what the concerns are. If you can alleviate those concerns, I can outsource that as opposed to insourcing it, and that'll get that done faster. Or I can bring on additional resources to be able to address that concern. Where we've got high risk elements that go into things, prioritizing high risk development to the very front end of the project, so that if early if those high risk things are going to flame out and you have to start over again, as opposed to saying, well, we'll do all of these other elements and then we'll go and do the high risk thing, 60% or 70% of the way through the program, where there's now a very small window in which to react if something goes sideways. These are all kind of planning exercises that can go a long way towards leaving the team the breathing room to be able to do something that's really creative and innovative.
Yeah. I also think asking the question of what can go wrong, right? Or what,
for sure.
Or what do we not know? That kind of questions can actually also, like, things can bubble up, right? Because then you're talking about, you're not just saying, oh, this is where we're going, right? You're actually talking about the journey to say what can happen, which can get into some really great aha moments. But that's always a surprise, I think, when you have, not that maybe a surprise, but that's always hiccups, right?
Yes, for sure.
And that makes it fun, right? Otherwise, it will be too boring.
That's why they call it work.
Yeah, right. No. Okay. But what about, I want to talk a little about your leadership style. So if you have to look at yourself and, what is your leadership style and has it changed over the last couple of years?
I mean, over the last couple of years, I don't think so, but over the course of my career, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. When I was at Lithonia Lighting, I was very much a driver, like going in and pushing on different elements of the team, be it in the engineering side or on the operations side or the procurement side, basically pushing and pushing and pushing.
Yeah.
And that can be effective, but it's not long-term sustainable. I think my realization over time is that certainly it's been demonstrated for me. So I worked for a chief executive whose approach was very much setting high expectations and then providing ludicrous amounts of support in order to try and hit those expectations, and then recognizing the fact that sometimes things just went wrong. Yeah. And kind of my personal desire to achieve what goals were set out was enhanced greatly by the amount of support I felt and the amount of caring, like as a human being, that I felt from that particular CEO. Yeah. And people used to marvel. They're like, people just run through brick walls for that guy. Like, what is up with that? And it's like, well, yeah, because he's got your back. And so he's asking for the moon, but you're not going to get hung out to dry if you don't deliver, because he knows he's asking for the moon. And so I think that lesson kind of in the middle of my career really highlighted to me, okay, the leadership really shouldn't be around task management and checking up on people and making sure that things are getting done and driving to a timeline. The leadership should really be more about understanding what unique skills everybody had on the team, making sure that they were best aligned for those skills to the tasks that we had to accomplish, providing as much support as possible, and then understanding that people had lives outside of work and that sometimes they were going to have things that were going on at home or things that were going on in the rest of their lives that were going to impact their ability to bring their full selves to work. Yeah. And just making sure that they felt fully supported in that was far more impactful to the ability to generate kind of breakthrough results than did we follow a timeline or did we hit all our KPIs or any of those other elements.
Yeah. Agree. Yeah. Providing that trust or the foundation, right? And understanding the personal life that's going on and the work life. If you can give everything, you will have a much better company culture. And people will actually then, right, go for the moon in some days, and other days they need to take care of you, of course, of the family. But it's a balance game, right? But it's so important to remember that trust to give it. What kind of leadership skills, if you're looking within your team, and I'm sure you have, right? There's different roles, but if you have to list like three, not leadership, but just like skills to work in a team, what kind of skills are you looking for?
So often the best teams are ones that have a wide diversity kind of present in the makeup. And so, and that can be background, that can be education, that can be, basically you don't want people that all think the same way. You want people that are thinking in different ways. Yeah. And then feel the freedom to be able to disagree without people taking offense. Yeah. And so in my career, I've had some of my best mechanical engineers have been industrial designers. And you wouldn't necessarily think, like off the top of your head, you'd think, well, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But it's because those guys and gals could see things more holistically.
Yeah.
And that was a key element to have on a team, as someone who could kind of see the big picture and see how things were integrative.
Yeah.
And so I always like to have an integrative thinker on a team, because they don't get bogged down in just the little details and then miss the larger picture. At the same time, I'm more of a big picture person. I always try and have a details person around, because I recognize that's not one of my strengths.
Yeah.
So having somebody who is very focused on the details and is going to see things and track things very minutely, that's useful. And so having the combination of those on the team, those tend to be complementary skills. And if you're lucky enough to be able to build teams that have that kind of diversity of thought,
Yeah.
then people can basically backfill for each other. So you don't end up with somebody who's really great at conceptualization and coming up with a big picture, but then can't execute in the end because they miss all the details. And you don't have someone who gets bogged down in the details and ends up with something that's very well executed, but not terribly exciting.
Yeah.
Like finding the way to basically have the constructive friction between those two viewpoints, and then integrating that into the team is really useful.
Nice.
And then I think empathy overall.
Yeah.
Right. That's like the key skill to look for, is understanding, and that goes for colleagues, that goes for customers, that goes for end users, that goes for installers, like being able to kind of internalize, these are the pain points that other people feel when they're in this process, and being able to kind of view the work that's being done not as here's a set of tasks to be done, but here's what I'm trying to achieve in the end. Goes back to the why. Like if I can understand the why deeply, then it makes me much more conscious of why am I spending so much time trying to resolve this one little feature? Well, because it has this knock-on impact that 50 other people are going to feel down the line, internally and externally to the program.
Yeah, I really like how you understand your team and the skills, and that takes me to this next question, because I think there's feedback, right? What have been a good way for you or learned over the years? How do you provide good feedback or constructive feedback to your team, or maybe just to one individual? What's working for you?
So my style has always been very integrative. So as opposed to being somebody who's far back and only gets updates on occasion, I tend to be someone who walks around.
Yeah.
And so it's not like there's going to be something that's happened over the course of weeks or months that's going to be a surprise, because I'm going to be
right there,
very intimately involved in what's going on.
Yeah.
So often it's more about just making sure that I'm listening well, and then being able to provide real-time feedback. And sometimes that's if something isn't getting done in a particular way, as opposed to saying, this is the way it needs to get done. It's like, here, why don't you send me that?
Yeah.
And I'll send you back something, and then you take a look at it and actually go and kind of demonstrate, like feedback by contribution. Like as opposed to redlining something up and just saying, here's all the things that are wrong with this, and come back and say, here's how I'd prefer to have it done, and then kind of providing a roadmap to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Nobody ever really likes criticism or negative feedback.
Who does?
Yeah. So the value, you kind of have to bring value in order to get people's attention. Otherwise, your natural reaction is to be defensive. Well, I didn't have enough time to do that, or I was getting really pressured to push this out on this particular timeline. Yeah. It's a much easier thing to do if you just say, well, here, let me help.
Yeah.
I'll help.
Yeah.
And not that I'm going to do that every time, but it's easier to show than it is to tell. And so if I can walk in and just go, here, I'll take that and then I'll come back and we'll walk through, like, how is this different than the way it was done the last time?
Yeah.
Then there's actually some value. Like, oh, well, that actually looks like a better way to do things.
Yeah.
Or maybe they don't, but at least there's a conversation now around, if this is the way I'm asking for it to be done, this is the way you're trying to
changing
deliver
the
it.
environment a little bit, right?
So it becomes more of a working with as opposed to working for.
Yeah.
I've run large and small organizations, and everybody I've worked with, that's how I describe those organizations. These are people I worked with, not people that worked for me.
Yeah, I like that. I also think if you're in the shoes, right, where you're on a project and you're struggling, instead of just sitting and blaming, right, everybody else, go and saying, I need help, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you go to somebody, right, whatever it is, but if you ask and saying, hey, I really need some help here, or this is where I'm stuck, nobody will go and saying, oh, you're like, oh, forget it, I'm not helping you, right? Anybody wants to help, even though maybe you're not the person that will be the first one, but then you can say, oh, you should talk to this person, right? Or let's get the team together and find a way. So I think it's so important for that person, if you are stuck, ask for help.
There's a thing with engineers, especially, where they don't want to show their work until they've got it fixed.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, the thing that I've encouraged people to do in the past is, as soon as you can communicate your idea, expose it to somebody else, and that makes engineers really uncomfortable, because they're like, well, but it's just like chicken scratch on a piece of paper. Like, why am I going to go? And it feels very vulnerable to like expose your very nascent idea and say, yeah, this is kind of what I'm thinking. But there's time and time again, what I found is that even in the early stages, you can be a little bit myopic about what it is you're doing. Like, oh, I've got this idea and I think I'm going to carry it forward. And someone might go, well, have you thought about how much that might cost?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, well, now that you mention it, that could be more expensive than we have budget for. And, or, gosh, that looks like a really risky approach to trying to solve that problem. Yeah. And, maybe you're kind of bound up in your optimism, like, I think I can make this happen. Yeah. And letting other people kind of be external critics at very early stages, it can feel like it's criticism, but really what it is it's saving you time. Yeah. Because if you pile 4 or 6 or 8 weeks into something, and then someone comes back at the end of that, after you have a model and it's on a spreadsheet, and here's all of the analysis that I did, and look at this thing that I came up with, and then someone pokes a hole in it at that point, you're like, oh man, now I have to go back and redo all that work. If they'd done it on day 2, you would have adjusted your approach, and it would have been much more efficient.
Somewhere else, right? I like it. I'm an engineer, so I could recognize some of it, like sitting and waiting.
It's really easy to do. So we tend to imbue our sense of purpose and our sense of value in the things that we do. Yeah. And so it's very easy to try and say, I'm going to hold on to this until I feel it's nice and polished and finished, and I can justify it. Yeah. And I can explain it really well, and then everybody will see that I'm good at what I do. Yeah. And the counterintuitive element of this is, you get much better when you don't polish it first, when you basically say, here's something that's really raw and early. Yeah. And it's basically exactly what you said, which is just asking for help, but it's asking for help in a very different sort of way. It's kind of trying to find a thought partner where you can say, how can I make this better? Or what things am I not seeing? Or, what do you think of this? Even just having to explain something. When I worked at Cree, I had a collaborator that I worked with all the time. And if I came up with an idea, I wouldn't even document it. I would walk into his office and I would sit down, and he had a whiteboard, and I just grab a marker and start writing on the whiteboard. And oftentimes either he poked holes in it by the time I was done, or just by me explaining it or trying to explain it, I kind of exposed my own holes that when it was in my head, I couldn't necessarily see, but I had to explain it to somebody else in order to try and get their feedback on it. I'm like, now that I'm drawing this out, this isn't such a great idea anymore. I'll come back once I figured this out again. Yeah. But that capability to kind of have that level of vulnerability to say, this is
Wow.
I'm going to trust you to not act like I'm stupid for having brought you something that might be bad.
Yeah.
But I'm willing to expose my thinking to you in order to try and make my thinking better.
Yeah.
That level of trust within organizations is super, super valuable.
Yeah. And that's actually back to what you said in the beginning, right? That we all have to fail a lot of times before you get there. So maybe it's not, we hate the word fail, but this is like the journey of learning, right? So that's what you've done there as well, walking into that office. So I really like that. It's always good to have that kind of people around you. And maybe you go to different people, right? For different projects. So
For sure.
Yeah. So, okay. How do you know? Because this is like the whole leadership in manufacturing, right? Oh, yeah. How do you know if you're a good leader?
Generally, I would say that if other people are following, then you're leading, right? A, a leader that's not leading is basically just a guy out on a walk. I forget where that phrase came from, but if you kind of try and rally the troops and you say, this is what we're going to go and do, and we're headed this direction, and you turn around and nobody's behind you, then you're not really leading.
No.
So I generally gauge my success, my personal success, not on did we achieve some fiscal milestone or did we achieve some launch date or some timeline or whatever the case might be, but more on do the people within the organization, have they progressed to the point where they are starting to basically lead in and of themselves. Essentially, if I'm doing a good job as a leader, then I'm creating other leaders within the organization, even if they don't have titles that call them, they're not a manager or they're not a director. If people are stepping up and basically saying, oh, well, we should do this, and I'm now going to try and basically bring people along in this journey to say we should change the way we're approaching this, and they're doing that independently, then that basically tells me, all right, so we're now establishing a culture where people feel like they can take ownership and say, this is what needs to happen in order for us to be successful. They understand the why, they understand the story that we're trying to tell, and they're willing to kind of step in and step outside of maybe their traditional job description and take responsibility for moving things in a way that makes things better.
Yeah, I like it. It's like the growing up, right? So it's the whole journey. Last question. So I want to reflect a little bit. So Paul, if you could give yourself an advice, and we can go 15 years back, what will that be?
I think it probably would have been to sweat the small stuff a little bit less, to focus more on people and relationships, and to focus less on timelines and specifications and the things that externally looked like they were most important turned out to be not the huge indicators of success for the organization or for those products. It turned out to be the creativity and the innovation that we were able to foster. And in some cases, I just happened to be I was lucky enough to be surrounded by a bunch of very brilliant people and was in the right place at the right time. Yeah. So when I look back in my earlier portion of my career, I think, you kind of fell into a bunch of different places that maybe you didn't even have a right to be there, but you had the opportunity and it turned out really well. Yeah. But absolutely, I would say that's where I would tell my older self, like, focus more on people, focus more on relationships, focus more on culture. Yeah. Worry a little bit less about whether you hit that spec or whether that due date was 2 days beyond what you said it was going to be. Yeah. Those things all come out in the wash. And the real challenge and the real success is in building people. Yeah.
And that's what you remember. I really like that. I think also, even though you can sit here, right, and say, oh, this is what I should have done or anything else. Everything is stepping stones. That's how I see it, in how you learned, and if you failed, and then you learned again, and you're making your decisions, right? So it's also, when you look back, is what makes you, right? So it's easy to say, oh, I should have done that, but I think it's also part of you, of that journey.
Absolutely.
So awesome. So if somebody wants to reach out to you, what will be the best way?
People can reach out. So I'm fairly visible on LinkedIn. People can reach out to me through my LinkedIn profile, or they can reach out to me at Insight Lighting. So I'm available here as well.
Perfect.
So happy to chat with anybody. I'm a pay it forward kind of guy. So if there's something I can do to help somebody out, ask.
Yeah, that's that. I think I have the title of the of the episode, right? Ask for help. No, awesome. And I will put that in the show notes and also on the episode page. That's on leadershipinmanufacturing.com. So thank you so much, Paul. I think this was exciting. We talked for a long time, but it was great, and I was happy to talk about LED lighting in the beginning because I love the geeks here. But it was really good. I think it was a really good discussion that we have, and learnings on the way. And I think that's just looping back here. It's so important to ask for help, right? Or have that collaboration with your team, but you need to have that empathy and trust, because otherwise it won't happen. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Leadership in Manufacturing podcast. I love that you're listening. Please find us on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast, and be sure to subscribe and rate us. Also, follow our LinkedIn page and Instagram, and check out leadershipinmanufacturing.com for previous episodes, blog posts, and our newsletter. So let's continue this journey together to become better leaders in the electronics industry. Remember, stay curious, keep learning. See you next time.